A History of Love. Chapter 1. History of Love. History of Love. When you love somebody, they know it. Show your love by showing your true spirit. The basic discovery about any people is the discovery of the relationship between its men and women. Pearl S. Buck, of Men and Women, 1941. Traditionally, marriage involved a kind of bartering, rather than mutual interdependence or role sharing. Husbands financially and economically supported wives, while wives emotionally, psychologically, and socially supported husbands. He brought home the bacon, she cooked it. He fixed the plumbing, she the psyche. Bettina Arndt, Private Lives, 1986. Marriage was a property exchange at one time. A woman became the property of her new husband. The abbreviation MRS is derived from MRs, the singular possessive. Historically, some cultures have regarded the sex organs as sacred entities to be worshipped and enjoyed in a communal, sociable way, while others saw them as dirty and lewd to be covered up as much as possible, only to come out briefly for procreation in a monogamous holy matrimony sanctioned by God. Saint Augustine, the City of God. Such is the wide disparity with respect to cultural attitudes towards sex and love. Some archaeologists, biologists, evolutionists, and literary types have dedicated a lot of effort into tracing out our social, intimate and biological development as a species, with some extensive books on the subject. Desmond Morris, Intimate Behavior, The Naked Ape, Man-Watching, etc. Michel Foucault, The History of Sexuality. Kate Millett, Sexual Politics. Ryan Eisler, The Chalice and the Blade, Sacred Pleasure, Sex, Myth, and the Politics of the Body. Eleanor Gatton, The Once and Future Goddess. Jamaica High Water, Myth and Sexuality. The three people who are generally considered the most prolific writers on the nature of love throughout the history of Western Europe are Plato, Plato's Symposium, The Republic, Alcibiades, Apology of Socrates, Gorgias, Phaedrus. Some people say Plato was the scribe for Socrates' many musings on love, so many of Plato's writings could be arguably called Socrates' ideas. William Shakespeare, Romeo and Juliet, Antony and Cleopatra, Measure for Measure, King Richard II, King Henry IV, Troilus and Cressida, The Tempest, Hamlet, The Winter's Tale. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Amour Propre, Confessions, Emile, Nouvelle Heloise, Letter to M. D'Alembert, Discourse on the Origins and Foundations of Inequality, Second Discourse, The Social Contract. Some other less significant but notable writers on the nature of love are André Gide, Corydon. Auguste Strindberg, Miss Julie. Cervantes, Don Quixote. Charles Dickens, David Copperfield. Chaucer, Geoffrey, The Canterbury Tales. Denis de Rougemont, Love in the Western World, 1940. Flaubert, Gustave, Madame Bovary, The Education of the Feelings. Franz Wedekind, Spring's Awakening. George Moore, Esther Waters. Goethe, Johann Wolfgang, Faust, Elective Affinities, Willem Meister's Apprenticeship. Grant Allen, The Woman Who Did. H.G. Wells, and Veronica. Hardy, Thomas, Tess of the D'Urbervilles, Jude the Obscure. Herman Sudermann, Magda. Homer, The Iliad, The Odyssey. Jane Austen, Pride and Prejudice, Emma, Love and Friendship, Mansfield Park. John Aubrey, Aubrey's Brief Lives. Lawrence, D.H., Sons and Lovers, Lady Chatterley's Lover. Montaigne, Michelda, Of Friendship. Proust, Marcel, Remembrance of Things Past, Proust.com. Radcliffe Hall, Well of Loneliness. Stendhal, Krister, The Red and the Black, On Love. Tolstoy, Leo, Anna Karenina, War and Peace, The Devil. There are still others like Aristotle, Nietzsche, Kant, Voltaire, Kierkegaard, Sartre, Locke, and most of our philosophers who didn't write detailed treatises on love, sex and romance but covered these topics indirectly through their general rantings about life. As the human race, we're loving and destructive at the same time. Different cultures in different periods of history have yielded a wide diverse smattering of ideologies for love, sex, and living arrangements. Sex, violence, erotica, intimacy, mind-altering substances, religion, God, politics, war, and power seem to be the activities people are the most interested in to get intense, transcendent feelings out of life one way or another. Why are some people free-spirited, hippie-type lovers and communal sharers of their lives, Ovid of Rome, while others are hell-bent on expansion, imperialism, destroying other cultures in order to ensure the proliferation of their own population whom the leaders probably control with their laws and law enforcement entities dictating that only monogamous marriages be legal and sex for money between consenting adults be illegal? Why do most societies domesticate women and turn men into dumb unemotional working clones hooked on production? Why were the Greco-Roman myths fraught with all manner of sex and love scenarios while the book of Genesis of the Holy Christian Bible reduced it down to a holy union between one man and one woman for life? Why did some cultures have sexual slaves and sacrifices while more puritanical ones tried to shut it out? Why do men generally see sex as primal while women see love as spiritual? Why do men in general need sex to feel good while women in general feel like submissive sex objects? Why do men in general want carnal pleasure while women want to care for someone and be cared for? Why do men dream of sultry sluts while women dream of Prince Charming? Why do women try to look beautiful while men try to get rich and powerful? Why do men have the power and women use their bodies sexually to get some of this power? What does AIDS have to do with it? Has God given us a message? Why is there a battle of the sexes? Why can't men and women be equal partners in all things? Why do men like to fight, compete, and hunt while women like to talk, cook, cooperate in friendship and wear pretty things? Why can't we all just get along? Why can't you trust your own intuitive standard and ignore the rest of the world out there? I'm not one to judge. Beyond what I wrote in this book over several years, the subject is way too speculative, philosophical, historic, and irrelevant to my life right now to give it anything but scant attention for its brief entertainment value here. So if you're really interested in the opinions of others about the contradictory nature of human sexual and intimate development throughout human history, try hashtag 306.709-81, hashtag 613.96, hashtag 646.76-78 or HQ801 at the library. Where did love come from? I believe that the capacity and desire for love is inherent simply because I experience it with my pets. They want to give love and be loved. We're like that too, but things get in the way, like the brainwash of cultural rules and the desire for power, with a lot of men in a lot of societies in past history choosing to dominate women rather than trying to love them. Up until modern times, marriage was largely an economic, social, and political contract. Men very rarely saw their wives as equals, they chose them as one chooses cattle, then bargained with their families for them. Women were often considered second-class citizens whose main function was to be servants both in the bedroom and in the management of the home. The concept of family is a relatively modern concept. Back in the old days, people lived in tribes or groups and procreated with whomever whenever they wanted to, just like monkeys. Sex was a commodity of exchange. Women gave men sexual favors in return for food, protection, and shelter. Oftentimes, it was the village that raised the child communally, not families per se. Despite all of this, there have been wisps of the romantic nature of love throughout history. The first known love poem translated from Sumerian clay tablets reads as follows. Bridegroom, dear to my heart. Goodly is your beauty, honey sweet. You have captivated me. Let me stand trembling before you. Bridegroom, I would be taken by you to the bedchamber. Bridegroom, let me caress you. My precious caress is more savory than honey. In the bedchamber, honey filled. Let us enjoy your goodly beauty. Lion, let me caress you. A few philosophers and enlightened entities took a romantic view of love, but they were far and few between. Egyptians wrote about love at first sight and gave us Mark Antony and Cleopatra, one of our first great passionate love stories. In fact, busts of Queen Nefertiti were found in her husband's, the pharaoh's tomb when excavated in 1933, giving some evidence to the fact that he must have loved her. Egyptologists have found 55 anonymous love poems on papyrus, Egyptian paper, and vases, dating back to around 1300 BC. The following is a love poem, Conversations in Courtship, about a man describing his lover. More lovely than all other womanhood. Luminous, perfect. A star coming over the skyline at New Year. A good year. Splendid in colors. With allure in the eyes turn. Her lips are enchantment. Her neck the right length. And her breasts a marvel. Her hair lapis lazuli in its glitter. Her arms more splendid than gold. Her fingers make me see petals. The lotus are like that. Her flanks are modeled as should be. Her legs beyond all other beauty. Noble her walking. My heart would be a slave should she enfold me. Egyptian hieroglyphics, 1300 BC. The idea of romantic love is almost always about two people, even in homosexual love stories through the ages. I have rarely seen any mention of polygamous loving relationships. Maybe they were repressed and rubbed out by our now Christian, monogamous-centered Western European tradition, or maybe they don't exist despite all the literature I've read about polygamous marriages. But then again, women were treated as property for most of past history, so these relationships were looked upon as what a man owned, not who he loved. The earliest myths about the creation of the sexes state that God first created androgynous creatures who were both man and woman, but because they were so strong and threatened his reign, he broke them in half by creating male and female such that they became two incomplete halves of a whole. By themselves, they're not fulfilled, but together they're strong. The Greek myths contain some of the earliest acknowledgments of passionate lust, with such gods as Cupid, Eros, Aphrodite, Apollo, Adonis, Psyche, Hero, and Leander, etc. The Roman goddess of love is Venus. Many cultures had symbols for the union between man and woman, like sun, male, and moon, female. Earth, woman, and sky, male. Yin, female, and yang, male. Adam and Eve. Hindu god and goddess Shiva and Shakti, lord of the dance, or Krishna and Radha. Greek Eros and Psyche. Jewish couple Tifereth and Makud. Egypt's Isis and Osiris, Anthony and Cleopatra. Heloise and Abillard. England's Lancelot and Guinevere, Romeo and Juliet or Robin Hood and Maid Marian. Germany's The Flying Dutchman and Swan Lake. Daphnis and Chloe by Longus, ancient philosopher. Lucius and Photis in The Golden Ass by Lucius Apuleius, 2nd century AD. Troilus and Cresside, Chaucer, Elizabeth, and Robert Browning, Tristan and Isolde/Isolde, a medieval British love story by Richard Wagner. Beauty and the Beast. Marguerite and Armand, the inspiration for Alexander Dumas's La Dame Auxiliary Camélias, Verdi's opera La Traviata and the Greta Garbo film Camille. The Duke and Duchess of Windsor about Edward, son of George V, who became King of England in 1936, abdicated, married a Mrs. Simpson after she got a divorce and lived with her happily ever after in France. Adam and Eve and Tarzan and Jane are the two archetypes I think about couples, a man and a woman living together in their own little Garden of Eden. The Roman statesman, writer, poet Ovid wrote about love in his poetry, such as the following passage from his love treatise The Art of Love. Love is a kind of war and no assignment for cowards. Where those banners fly, heroes are always on guard. Soft, those barracks? They know long marches, terrible weather. Night and winter and storm, grief, and excessive fatigue. Often the rain pelts down from the drenching cloudbursts of heaven. Often you lie on the ground, wrapped in a mantle of cold. If you are ever caught, no matter how well you've concealed it, though it is clear as the day, Swear up and down it's a lie. Don't be too abject and don't be too unduly attentive. That would establish your guilt far beyond anything else. Wear yourself out if you must and prove, in her bed, that you could not possibly be that good, coming from some other girl. Ovid, The Art of Love. Ancient Chinese culture had its love stories as described in James J. Y. Liu's The Chinese Knight-Errant, 1967, and A Tale of Chivalrous Love by Xiaoyi Fengyue Chuan. Descartes believed that love was a commodity that attached itself to the inner core of a person. In essence, the object of love started to live within you. Ortega y Gasset in his treatise on love wrote that love is a centrifugal act of the soul in constant flux that goes towards the object and envelopes it in warm corroboration, uniting with it, positively reaffirming in its being. Several philosophers took this deep view that love is an act of the soul which seeks to touch the soul of this other person. Dante said that love moves the sun and the stars. Sir Walter Scott said that love is heaven and heaven is love. Alfred Lord Tennyson said, "'Tis better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all." Christianity is based on love. Many people have deified love throughout history and an equal number have criticized it, citing it an overrated, soppy sensation not realistic within the realm of human emotions, yet most of us are hooked on that dreamy feeling of being swept away by a mythical, larger-than-life romantic dreamboat lover. Even though the Greeks and Romans explored the lusty passionate side of love, Christianity, which overtook Europe in the 4th century with the crowning of Constantine as the Holy Roman Emperor, basically brought it back to the Dark Ages, encouraging a monogamous passionless bond between a man and a woman geared to produce kids and raise them, i.e., be fruitful and multiply without aught of pleasure. St. Augustine basically nailed the deal when he wrote his treatises on Christian love and did away with all inklings of pleasure in the bond of love, citing it as an obligation of duty in the eyes of God. Whereas free sex was rampant in the earlier European world, when Christianity came into vogue, the standard changed to monogamous one-man, one-woman families, and that was it. That's not to say people stopped their lusty lifestyles. Just read Chaucer's Canterbury Tales sometime, which was written in a supposedly Christian Britain and exposed the hypocrisy of keeping up appearances over what was really goin' in backrooms. Guilt was introduced as a big tool to thwart the possibility of fornication and adultery, which were considered sins in the eyes of God, but it didn't seem to stop people much. Christianity was geared to cut people off from their true natural primal states. When the British went to India, they tried to destroy the sensual passionate icons of Hinduism they saw dedicated to sex and love. Throughout history, the culture that people lived in often determined their views on love. Many warring cultures forbade marriages and families because they wanted tough warriors. They only wanted the men to impregnate the women and leave them to raise the children on their own while they fought their wars solo. But throughout man's evolution, romantic love eventually developed and flourished until now, where it's a free world in the West and we can freely explore our whims, passions, and lusts. But in much of the rest of the world, like some of the Asian and Arab cultures, romance is still in the Dark Ages, with women as second-class citizens and marriages arranged for material gain and status to raise children without forethought of personal feelings entering into the man-woman relationship. The word love is derived from the Old English word meaning to be fond of and the Latin word libet, which means to please. Shakespeare expressed love in Twelfth Night. What is love? 'Tis not hereafter. Present mirth hath present laughter. What's to come is still unsure. In delay there lies no plenty. Then come kiss me, sweet and 20. Youth's stuff will not endure. Despite all these early notions about romantic love, they were basically wisps in a male-dominated, chauvinistic world which viewed women as servants and slaves existing to serve men. So despite a few artists and poets throughout history, most men viewed women as their property, there to produce children, raise them, take care of the home, and that's it. Christian wedding vows use the word obey, which tacitly puts the woman lower than the man. It wasn't until Margaret Sanger, 1879–1966, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Marie Stopes, 1880–1958, Clelia Duell Mosier, 1863–1940, Catherine Beamont Davis, 1860 to 1935, and a few others that men started seeing women as equals in the workforce, in matters of love and in the family situation. library.berkeley.edu/bank/roho-online/suffragists.html. On a negative note, Freud developed an archaic theory about how love and sex are developed during the childhood years through his psychosexual stages: oral, breastfeeding, anal, learning to use the bathroom, phallic, masturbation as 4 to 5-year-old kids, and fall in love with opposite sex parent, Oedipus complex for boys, Electra complex for girls, and the genital stage at adolescence. He called love a mental illness caused by a temporary break from reality when you're not thinking clearly. Carl Jung, his protege, called love a fatal compulsion. In today's world, I've seen what I perceive to be a strange view of love advanced by several different New Age types. They say that romantic love, the traditional way we've all been conditioned, is an infantile, immature, narcissistic process of projecting our wants and desires onto another person, and when it doesn't fit anymore, we fall out of love and grow to hate our partners. We see them as gods, we want them to be all things to us, but it never works. They say true love is getting over this lusty primal view of love. It's caring for the spiritual growth of this other person and nurturing it as if this can do anything to purge those passionate, lusty feelings we have inside that we want to unload onto and into another human being. This is what I can't understand. My love for someone is supposed to be precisely the fact that she awakens something within me that tells me she's special, I'm special to her, together we've got good genes, and when we connect, we both feel special in a depraved, lusty way together. This is my version of romantic love: two self-centered, self-loving people sharing their self-centeredness with each other as a whole, which is perfectly alright, not this sanitized religious guru type version saying I'm supposed to care for her spirituality and help her grow as a human being. It's more luscious and lusty than that. It's a primal thing. You either got it deep down or you don't. All the soppy, psychobabble, spiritual love talk in the world can't awaken it if it's not there to begin with. You might find books on the history of love from a literary point of view at #809.93 or PN56 at the library, the Love in Literature section, books on the history of sex at #613.90-96 or HQ12. The emergence of romantic love. 1. Love was invented by European culture. Denis de Rougemont, Love in the Western World. The essence of romance is uncertainty. Oscar Wilde. Romantic love is about one thing: two people being honest with each other without their masks on, who consciously want to spend time with each other and do. The concept of romantic love goes all the way back to the Sanskrit word lubudai, which means desire. In the modern era, beyond the love gods of mythology, the first real live person who actually lived that we give the label of romantic lover to is Cleopatra, but she was more a conniver than a lover. Born in 69 BC to King Ptolemy in Egypt, according to Roman historian Plutarch, who wrote her biography over a century after she died, she thought she was a goddess, adorned herself very lavishly for her day, plotted to have her siblings killed in order to become queen, used men to serve her own ends sexually, sometimes having a man killed if she had sex with him and wasn't pleased, and used men to plot her way to supreme power, which backfired on her in the end, but the real story may be quite different. The Romans knew they had to control Egypt if they wanted to control the world. The two most famous Romans, Caesar and Mark Antony, supposedly competed for her along with other men, but in the end, she was smitten with Antony. They were defeated by Roman Octavius at Acheron, whereupon they committed suicide together. It may have been for love, but more than likely it was because they had lost everything, all their political power and wealth, and had nothing to look forward to but a future as prisoners of the Roman Empire. In ancient Egyptian language, the word love meant a longing desire, but the truth is that very few people had time for romance or love in the old days. Marriages were economic relationships done for political reasons to create alliances, and for the pragmatic reason of a husband, wife, and children all working together to eke out a subsistence living for themselves. Besides Antony and Cleopatra, The only other major love story BC is Solomon with his 700 wives and 300 concubines, then the Queen of Sheba, which he wrote about in the Song of Songs, which is a part of the Christian section in this book. If you look at love throughout history, you will see that its essential nature hasn't changed at all. It's still a primal, deep, love at first sight kind of thing when the object of your desire hits your eyes for the first time, when it's the most powerful, and subsequent times after that the sight of him or her fills your senses and sends you into a zone of transcendence for a while. It's rare, but this is it. Even in the modern world, we all instinctively know this is what we want, although very few of us will ever get it for two reasons. 1. We're not hot stuff ourselves to be able to mutually attract the magical, heavenly person when they appear on the scene. 2. These magical, heavenly people rarely exist in the real world, and when they do, this magical quality of inner and outer beauty together in one person often only exists for a short window of time in your youth. Then most people become either one or all of the following: fat, chubby, cynical, jaded, brainwashed, status conscious, dull, boring, lazy, money crazy, stressed out, uppity, food addicts, drunks, etc. Very few people keep this attractive spark strong and vital over a lifetime, although some do. I've seen a few, but it's less than 10% of the population. Most of us deteriorate into generic, pasty-faced figures of dough, clay, sugar, and cultural brainwash as we age past 35. In the ancient past, some people thought that the sensation of love was a gift from the gods, shooting their divine lightning bolt into you, telling you that you must marry this person. Even though the Greeks had such lovely goddesses in their mythology as Diana, Aphrodite, Adonis, Eros, the Amazons, the nymphs, etc., their marriages were conducted for reproductive reasons, to bring children into the world. There was even a period in the 4th century BC when Athenians weren't allowed to marry non-Athenians in order to preserve the pure Greek bloodlines. Girls had to be virgins and marry young. The father chose the husband for his daughters. Young single women weren't allowed out on the streets, which is probably why Athens was rampant with homosexuality and prostitution. Young men and boys were the only flesh walking the streets. It was Christopher Marlowe, the 17th century writer, who first said that the beautiful Helen of Troy's face launched 1,000 ships, not anything the ancient Greeks said, although they do have the story of Orpheus and Eurydice in their mythology. Roman culture was much the same as Greek culture in terms of hypocrisy. Men were expected to marry young, virginal girls in arranged marriages for procreation's sake, to bring children into the world for the glory of Rome and for the political and economic benefits of family alliances, making new friends, etc. Rome had some of the most puritanical rules around: no adultery, no sex during the day, women weren't allowed to be completely naked while having sex, etc. But in reality they were just like the Greeks and the later Victorians. In a repressive society, people seem to engage in the forbidden fruit more so than they would otherwise, because it's forbidden, therefore more exciting that way. People are in the back rooms breaking the rules while pretending to be pious and humble out front. Roman men were homosexual en masse too, just like the Greeks. Because the punishment for adultery was so severe and young girls were hidden away out of public, young boys were the next best thing, and older powerful men chased them to get their sexual thrills. Around 18 BC, Augustus, the Roman emperor, got it into his head that Rome's birth rate was falling because of debauchery and decadent lifestyles, but it was probably really because the lead content in the city's water pipes was poisoning the people and rendering many of them sterile, so he made up all kinds of rules to help people get married and stay married, with those harsh penalties for adultery like getting your nose cut off, loss of wealth, divorce, and possible banishment to obscure places. Rome and Greece were probably the first civilizations in the modern Western era who cultured a leisure lifestyle over and above working for a living, which is why romantic love and hedonistic sex probably emerged there before it came out in other places on the planet. Sociologically speaking, governments want control over their people, but love and sex are freedom and anarchy. So because governments and religion together controlled most of the world's societies until the Industrial Revolution, the concepts of romantic love and sexual hedonism were relatively obscure, relegated to little wisps of expression here and there, Basically the ancient Greek and Roman cultures and the chivalrous period of the Middle Ages where knights had to be given some leeway in exchange for going off to fight in the Crusades, so the term chivalry, derived from the term cavalier which means free and adventurous, was used to define knights as noble, upstanding, romantic, attractive people who won the favor of the fair damsels who, in turn, loved to be romanced by them because they were the heroes of the day, much like pop stars are these days. This is the myth. In real life, knights were crude, barbaric, fighting, raping and pillaging men who had to be idealized as heroes in order to attract more young men into giving up their lives to fight for the honor of God and state in the Crusades. It was in this atmosphere that the minstrels, gypsies, and troubadours of the day popularized the notion of romantic love in Europe by writing poems and songs about it, then going around singing about it, acting like charismatic, bohemian, artist-lover types themselves. This is how the concept of romantic love developed in the West, from these bards writing songs to appease the nobility and the knights going off to the Crusades. Whereas before the Middle Ages, sex was a primal thing, marriage an economic thing, and men were trained never to bow down to a woman, all of a sudden, it became the cool thing to do, partially inspired by watching the way Muslim Arabs treated their women at the time, which has since changed somewhat. To bow down to a woman, to humble yourself to her, to throw away your pride and ambition for her was a noble gesture of love that came to be known as the concept of courtly love and has cemented itself into European then world cultural ideology as the concept of what we now call romantic love. Abillard and Heloise is a medieval French love story about Peter Abillard, a teacher and minister born in Brittany in 1079 who became a highly educated, prominent scholar, opened a school and noticed a pretty 17-year-old girl living next door, Heloise, who he offered to tutor for free. She, being naive and taken by his celebrity and charm, was soon seduced by him. They started having regular love-making sessions, were caught by her uncle, she got pregnant. Abillard wanted to marry Heloise, but she knew this would ruin his reputation, so they carried on a complicated, passionate, tumultuous love affair for the rest of their lives, which exemplifies the spirit of the romantic ideal, much like the forbidden love of Romeo and Juliet and any modern love story where two lovers are prevented from seeing each other by society's conventions but do it anyway regardless of consequences. Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet was not a unique concept. It was merely a reworked version of a classic tale of forbidden love. Boy meets girl, but boy is from the wrong side of the tracks, from the wrong religion, family, poor, slave, etc. They fall madly in love, have to keep it a secret but get deeper into it, symbolically denouncing their friends, family, and culture for their love until they're discovered, and then have to choose between love and loyalty to the status quo. Hundreds of stories dealt with this theme, all the way to West Wide Story in recent times or Greece about the greasy working class guy and the upper class princess. All these stories have the common thread of monogamous romantic love. There can only be one love for them. Give me love or give me death, because life would not be worth living without my one true, pure mate, as originally stated by Plato of ancient Greece. Today, we harbor the same ideals as Plato first announced, then the Middle Ages with its concept of courtly love, after which the emerging mercantilist class of Europe with their fairy tale ideals of Rapunzel and Cinderella waiting for the noble knight in shining armor. When he appears, all is transformed, life becomes magically wonderful, but the problem is that it doesn't last, yet this doesn't seem to matter much. Some people all through history have craved romantic love so much that they always found a way to seek it out and express it, and it's no different today. Despite all the talk about the casual sex lifestyle, most people want a romantic love, a spiritual, sensual, emotional connection with one other person that seems to be divinely inspired, a gift from the gods. In my opinion, the ideal of transcendent romantic love is an archetype we're all born with, to seek out and find a soulmate like us who will dramatically elevate our lives to a higher level. But throughout history, the societies people lived in, many through religion and politics, have kept people down and repressed them such that they couldn't express nor experience these yearnings inside except in wisps, like the forbidden loves of Anthea and Abracamas, Tristan and Isolde, written by Xenophon of Ephesus, 2nd century AD, Capuleto and Montagues written by Lope de Vega in the 16th century, Romeo and Juliet and so on and so forth. Now that we're relatively free, even though we're not allowed to do recreational drugs if we want, people still look to romantic love as the most intense, freeing experience with the highest potential for happiness more than anything else on the planet. It seems inborn in us. Even the most ardent hedonist wants some romantic love mixed in with a casual sex lifestyle. Stendhal in 1819 wrote on love, de l'amour, in which he identified 4 kinds of love. Mannerly love, physical love, vanity love, passionate love. Passionate love was considered the highest, all-encompassing, transcendent kind of love to Stendhal, and he wrote his great treatise to it in an effort to get a certain young lady to fall in love with him. Even though he lived a tragic life not getting this intense love he craved, his work gave millions of his readers insight and inspiration into the higher stages of romantic love. Romantic love has had a bad reputation in civilized society. The church and state have to repress it because it makes people free, emotional, and wacky, unlike the responsible, rational beings they should be. And at the same time, even though a lot of our fairy tales portray a happily ever after scenario, much of our literature presents romantic love as a fatalistic kind of thing, that love makes people crazy and ends in tragedy, so it's a double-edged sword. Romantic love is the sweet nectar we all want, but if we indulge too much, it often ends with shattered lives, tragedies, death, suicide, or a life spent yearning for the one you lost. Miss Havisham in Dickens's Great Expectations, or could never get, and no one will ever take his or her place like Marcel Proust, 1871–1924, in his Remembrance of Things Past, à la recherche au temps perdu, Proust.com, his obsession with Albertine whose soul he never wins. She dies and he spends the rest of his life mourning this lost love. Even the Thornbirds, arguably the greatest love story of the modern era, ends in a tragedy. Maggie wanted the cardinal, he loved God, and in the end when their son drowned and she told him he was his father, he started crying and reached out his hand to her, but she rejected him. There was a point where her unrequited love couldn't sustain itself even though she forgives him at the end. Sociologically speaking, the spread of the ideology of romantic love parallels the spread of wealth in Europe and the rest of the world. The wealthier people got, mostly through trade and business, the more open and free they got. The more leisure they had, the more bored they were with the established religious political order, so they turned to love, sex, drugs and alcohol to give them excitement. Most people got married back in them days, but they were mostly marriages of economic and religious traditions. In order to have fun, they had their affairs with interesting, dashing people who they came across out in the world. It was romantic love with a third wheel, it's just that it wasn't in your typical marriage. Men and women alike cheated. After the discovery of America, the emerging bourgeois in Europe seem to have had the best of both worlds, get married for respectability's sake to have kids and please the community, but have their mistresses on the side to pursue their individual ideals of passionate romantic love. This is how they dealt with it in the real world, but Proust seemed to discount even this. To him, the only really love is imaginary love, projecting all your love and emotions onto another person like fantasies in your mind. Then when the real thing happens, it can't compete with this godlike, divine type of romantic love we all dream of, which is constantly reinforced by all the dreamy love stories that are always beamed at us through the media. Is it any wonder that romantic people are often termed as dreamy and irresponsible? Baudelaire defined romantic love as an oasis of horror in a desert of boredom, thus saying it's a temporary thing that comes in bits and pieces then goes. The fact remains that we all want this feeling, some of us for a lifetime, some for just a while, to love and be loved in an infinite, infantile, unconditional, divine way, but ultimately most of us don't get it, and if we do, it's only for a season, but it's the hope and imagination that keeps us going, which is probably why soap operas, romance novels, and love movies will never go out of style. I read an article about why women love horses so much. It said it's a form of self-pleasuring, a substitute for a man, and a fantasy of a free, powerful relationship with such a magnificent being, all things that replicate the spirit of romantic love without the actual love itself. The horse represents the wild and free, powerful, magnificent, sexy, passionate romantic love the girl wants in real life. Almost all of us want love. Beneath our masks, our actions, our hobbies, etc., almost all of us want a straight, intense, spiritual sensual love affair. Waiting for the great love affair could be the greatest cause of mental illness on the planet. I feel it's best to develop a love of life itself, to not be obsessed with the need for romantic love so you enjoy your life as you go along, and if you happen to meet a soulmate on the way, great, but if you don't, that's fine too. You're living a great life anyway. Victorian.lang.nagaya-u.ac.jp/victorian-web/authors/Swinburne/Harrison/1.html, Courtly Love. The emergence of romantic love too. Let not a man, from a selfish appetite, be strongly addicted to any sensual gratification. In caressing women there is no turpitude, for to such enjoyments men are naturally prone, but a virtuous abstinence from them produces signal compensation. Confucius. Love cannot exert its powers between two people who are married to each other. Medieval saying. We could easily have found someone else to share my bed. I'm sure you recognize that. But after thinking it over, I in my interests and your parents in yours, and reviewing all the possible candidates for our household management and the care of our children, I selected you and your parents myself. Xenophon, Ancient Greek. Love, sweet Chloe, is a god, a young youth and very fair and winged to fly. And therefore he delights in youth, follows beauty, and gives our fantasy her wings. His powers so vast, that of love is not so great. He governs in the elements, rules in the stars, and domineers even over the gods that are his peers. There is no medicine for love, neither meat, nor drink, nor any charm, but only kissing and embracing and lying naked together. From Daphnis and Chloe, Ancient Greek Story. In virtually all cultures worldwide throughout history, marriage was arranged by parents for practical reasons, with the contention that the couple fall in love slowly over time after the marriage through a long, slow courtship process. Most cultures had the wife at home for housekeeping duties and courtesan somewhere in a bordello, temple, harem, dance hall, or private accommodation, sometimes a room in the family house where the husband kept both his main wife/wives, his mistress/mistresses, and if he had slaves, he kept the special ones around the house. In the past, the wife's role was as the sex object, to lie still and be unaroused while her husband performed his primal act. Many people, including doctors, didn't think that women experienced sexual pleasure. In order to find a female who enjoyed sex or at least acted like she did, a man had to visit a brothel, which is one of the reasons they have been so popular throughout history. Men didn't get the sex they really wanted from their wives. Marriage was more like a social institution. Even though people were often lusty in back rooms, it wasn't until the tail end of the Renaissance that passion started to triumph over arranged marriages done for practical reasons. The romantic ideal of the Renaissance to seek divine love through human love started to triumph over the Christian ideal of passionless love done to fulfill God's commandment of be fruitful and multiply, but there has never been a clear victory on either side. Arranged marriages remained prevalent in Europe until modern times. One of the attractions of the New World, America, was that people could marry who they wanted without worrying about those old world rules. In the old days, marriages were arranged for practical gain and for the politics of gaining power in the tribe. Young men were considered the prizes because they brought power and the ability to work to the family they married into. Girls were such a liability that the father of the girl often paid a dowry to the man who married her. Even today, much of the world's marriages are arranged if you consider Islam, Hinduism, and China. The prevailing ideology of China is that the purpose of marriage is to produce male children, so even today, some girl babies are still left in the elements to die since they have a law that limits them to one child per couple. In the West, we are tacitly encouraged on who to marry, particularly among religious and ethnic groups who want their children to marry their own kind in order to strengthen their group, so they set up social events for this purpose, To keep the so-called bloodlines pure. The chivalrous tales of old portrayed the noble knight as a kind and helping man to all the pretty maidens out there in order to get favors from them, but the truth was that the guy went out and did his thing with the fair maidens while the wife stayed home wearing the chastity belt he put on her. So love and lust have always been a double standard, with men burning the candle at both ends while women stayed home being faithful. From the 16th century until modern times, civilized society has always taken a schizophrenic view to love. On the one side, we have the prurient interests on the lusty hedonist side, while on the other, we have the puritanical God-fearing viewpoint which felt that physical love was evil except to procreate, with every middle ground approach in between catering to what every individual justified to him or herself what was right. With the emergence of a so-called polite society in the late 1600s, the ideals of Romanticism were unleashed en masse on the Western world for the first time, with such ideals as the proper chivalrous gentleman and the swashbuckling Casanova, Giacomo, 1725 to 1798. In my opinion, you judge a culture's views on romantic love by their literature. The Greeks and Romans had very torrid myths and legends about love in the early days of civilized society, so the potential for it was always there. We seem to have an inherent need to nurture someone of the opposite sex and love them gently and greatly, but then when I look at the likes of the Vikings, the pillaging Christian crusaders of the Middle Ages, the Spanish conquistadors or Genghis Khan and his Mongol hordes, I wonder how romantic is man really, or is it just cultural indoctrination to tame his inclination to want sex from any attractive girl he comes across? In any case, man, not necessarily woman, is a two-headed being, the lusty primal one and the gentle romantic one. It's up to you as an individual to decide how you will live your life out. Anyone can be a gentle, loving romantic to the right girl if they choose to be, but for a lot of men, it's just about satisfying their primal drives without any forethought of romance involved, whilst for others, it's a repression of their true desires to be in a monogamous relationship. If you read historic literature regarding sex, love, culture, and family, you will see how different cultures played off all of these factors to form their attitudes and day-to-day lifestyles. It's an interesting exercise to see where our romantic and sexual viewpoints came from. We have some great romantic stories like Adam and Eve, Cleopatra and Anthony, Robin Hood and Maid Marian, Rapunzel and the Noble Prince, David Copperfield, Jane Eyre, etc. It would be nice to have the freedom to sit around, contemplate life and examine the great literature of old for their purity of content regarding human nature and their richness of creativity, uninfluenced by the pop culture, mass media world of today, which has effectively reduced the human race to the same bland viewpoint on life everywhere there's TV and corporate advertising. To understand the romantic spirit of human nature, simply read some books about myths, legends, fairy tales, classic novels, and cultural stories in general. History of Love websites. Medieval-weddings.net. oneengagement-rings.com, History of Wedding Rings. bbc.co.uk/history/society_culture. bookpage.com/0505bp/Nicole_Krauss.html, Book The History of Love, by Nicole Krauss. habad.org/their/bb/article.asp?8=60680, History of Love by a Jewish Man. discoverychannel.co.in/history_sex_love/introduction. discoverychannel.co.uk/best_of/history_sex_love. ejhs.org/volume2/history.htm. fordham.edu/halsall/sbook1v.html, medieval sourcebook. fordham.edu/halsall/ancient/2000 Egypt-love.htm. heroesofhistory.com/page73.html, Heroes of History on Love. historychannel.com/exhibits/Valentine, The History of Valentine's Day. Jews-for-Allah.org/history-of-love. Kamazachastra.com, Kama Sutra. OurCivilization.com. SoundExp.com/history.html, A Brief History of Love Songs. yogaangel.blogspot.com, A Short Illustrated History of Love. Chapter 2. Love Chivalry. Courtly love info/be courteous. Courtly love has cemented itself into European cultural ideology as the concept of what we now call romantic love. Andreas Capellanus wrote The Art of Courtly Love around 1186 AD. Here are some rules. Avoid greed, be noble. Stay pure sexually the one you love. Don't go after someone already in a relationship. Don't fall in love with an evil or bad person like a whore, an adulterer, a thief, etc. Don't lie. Don't gossip. Be polite and courteous. Follow your lover's desires. Don't act more passionate than her. Be private about your love life. Don't blab about it. Listen to your woman. Do what she says. Don't act aggressive in lovemaking. Be more relaxed and gentle. Millersp.edu/English/homepage/Duncan/Medfem/court.html, Courtly Love. Millersp.edu/English/homepage/Duncan/Medfem/fact.html, Courtly Love. Victorian.lang.naga-u.ac.jp/Victorian-web/authors/Swinburne/Harrison/1.html, Courtly Love. Casanova and Other Great Lovers. Whatever visible pleasure I gave made up 4/5s of my own. Casanova, from his memoirs. Focus on her pleasure. If it were sufficient to love, things would be too easy. The more one loves, the stronger the absurd grows. It is not through lack of love that Don Juan goes from woman to woman. It is ridiculous to represent him as a mystic in quest of total love. Whence each woman hopes to give him what no other has ever given him. Each time they are utterly wrong and merely manage to make him feel the need of that repetition. At last, he said, "But once more I have given you my love, why should it be essential to love rarely in order to love much?" Albert Camus, Don Juanism. Great lovers treat their women as equals and try to please them. It sounds simple, but most men don't do these rudimentary things. Giacomo Casanova, 1725–1798, was born in Venice. As a child, he felt ashamed of his mother's occupation as an actress/prostitute and her constant neglect of him. His grandmother sent him off to live with a priest and be educated in Padua at 9 years old, where he met up with the priest's adult sister Bettina, who flirted with him. He fell in love with her, but she had a boyfriend. When she contracted smallpox, Casanova nursed her back to health, which was a part of the development of his kindly, loving, sensitive way with women. He went to a school controlled by monks and for a while thought he would become a priest. He graduated from the University of Padua with a degree in law. In those days, the church was a very powerful force in Europe, and his mother thought it would be a way for him to achieve some power and wealth, so with her connections, she got him a position with the church. He worked as an intern for one of the most powerful cardinals in Rome. He was given an audience with the Pope, where he stated he wanted to do some research in sexuality by reading erotic literature, and made a request to the Pope that he be allowed to read it, which the Pope granted. At the age of 18, he fell in love with Lucretia Castell, 10 years older than him. They started an illicit love affair, which was the end of his apprenticeship to the priesthood when they caught him and booted him out. This was his first inkling of questioning conventional morality and following his natural desires. Lucretia became pregnant and there was a big scandal, but he felt he was doing nothing wrong. He was kicked out of Rome. Penniless, he went back to Venice, which was the hedonistic center of Europe in those days. Just as his mother was a performer, so too did Casanova feel that the key to get what you want is to be a performer, to entertain people. In those days, young commoners could escape from their lot in life by getting a patron from among the elite. His mother hooked him up with a rich nobleman, but he got caught cavorting with the nobleman's girlfriend, so that was the end of that. Quite by chance he was walking behind a wealthy nobleman, Matteo Bragadin, who had a heart attack, and Casanova attended to him. He knew a bit about medicine since he had studied it in college. This nobleman, taken by Casanova's good looks and charms, adopted him as his unofficial son, and this was Casanova's ticket to Venetian high society life. Because of his handsome features, he was able to charm many women, which is how he developed his hedonistic sexual attitude, which was something like sex is sacred, spiritual, and instrumental to health and well-being, but it's not about sex, it's about making love, love whoever you happen to be with. He believed that making love was the highest act of nobility among human beings. His attitude was that when you please your lover, you please yourself. He enjoyed watching his women writhe in pleasure. It gave him pleasure. This was a very enlightened attitude in those days, considering most men were sexist pigs simply because this was the standard way of being back then. Casanova was one of the first male feminists around. In those days, women were second-class citizens, but he insisted on treating them as equals, which is one of the reasons he was so successful as a seducer. In the midst of the decadence of Venice, Casanova met Katharina Capritti, labeled CC. In his memoirs, who he fell in love with and proposed to. Her father forbade her to see him, but she did in the guise of going out to the famous Venetian carnival, which lasted several weeks. When the father found out, he sent her off to a convent where she told another girl there training as a nun, known as MM. In his memoirs, of her exploits with Casanova. When Casanova finally tracked CC down, this other girl, MM, seduced him, then told him he was being watched while they made love by a French diplomat, François de Berny. MM pushed Casanova further and arranged for threesomes and quartets among the four of them. Casanova's pure love for CC was tainted by all this, and CC became unpure in his view, but the fact was that he gave in to his temptations of sexual pleasure, so he realized he couldn't marry CC and had to be who he was. Because it was illegal for any Venetian nobleman to mix socially with a foreign diplomat, which Casanova had done, he was thrown in jail, where he stayed for 15 months until he escaped and went to Paris, where he continued on with his sexual exploits in this modern city, which was the vanguard of the Age of Enlightenment, having occasional discussions with the likes of Voltaire and some of the pre-revolution intellectuals about town. So he was an intellectual by day, a partier and lover by night. He started a lottery, made a lot of money, and fell in love with a French girl, Henrietta. In his memoirs, he wrote that they went to bed in love and woke up the next morning more in love, but she was an aristocrat married to an important man in an arranged loveless marriage which she had run away from. There were people searching for her, so she had to leave him after their short fling. On leaving, she scratched a message in the window pane with her diamond ring, "You will forget Henriette," which he never did because she was the love of his life. He wrote in his memoirs that love comes only after the sensual experience. He lost her, then started gambling and wandering. He was a pleasure-seeking, self-destructive wanderer who caught STDs a number of times through sex with prostitutes. He kept trying for new pleasures, but they never satisfied him fully. He became a sexual adventurer and hedonist with a reputation to live up to. Although he knew how to charm women, he never settled down. He had a fetish for older women, probably carried over from his early sexual experiences with his babysitter/nanny. It's generally believed that he lies in his memoirs saying his lovers were much younger than they actually were. He contracted venereal disease at least a dozen times in his life. He said he enjoyed making love to women because she was beautiful, because I loved her, and because her charms meant nothing unless they had the power to drown out all reason. He called his penis a valiant steed, and for a time, every romance was another conquest in the search for eternal bliss. In a romantic sense, Casanova was in love with every woman he pursued, but he just wasn't monogamous about it. He could love 10 women all at the same time. He once said, "When the lamp is taken away, all women are alike," referring to his many casual sexual encounters with women, but he also said, "Without love this great business is a vile thing," implying that he believed love should go along with sex. He was a smart man, part scam artist who charmed his way into high society and into the hearts of many women, but was broke many times, heartbroken, and spent time in jail for various crimes. Just like he was obsessed with getting his mother's love, which he never really got. In London, Casanova finally met a woman whose love he wanted. He had heard that she was easy mistress material, Marie Le Champion, but she strung him along, making him fall in love with her more than tormenting him. Casanova became obsessed with her, but although she teased, she never gave him love, something which Casanova was not accustomed to. He snapped and violently attacked her. It was the end of his feeling within that he could have any woman he wanted. Up until that point, he felt himself a great lover who could do as he pleased sexually with willing lovers, but then he aged and love was no longer that intense in his life. He left England and traveled for 20 or so years, dabbling in writing and politics. He got a job as a librarian in Bohemia, Czechoslovakia, which is where he wrote his memoirs. His reminiscing brought him back to thoughts about Henrietta. He wrote her and asked to meet again. She said that was not possible, but also said he was the love of her life. He was a fallible human being who had a jolly good life. He was a pioneer, rejecting conventional values and doing as he pleased. His views on treating women and the pursuit of pleasure were very enlightening, albeit disturbing for his day. He had his love trysts, and when love failed him or didn't feel as strong as he was led to believe, he got into the sexual adventuring lifestyle. Still, at heart, he had several great loves in his life, Henrietta and C.C., so he was like all of us, a walking contradiction. Don Juan from the 14th century, Casanova, and Rudolph Valentino, a married virgin, the Sheik, son of the Sheik, Blood and Sand, a sainted devil, the four horsemen of the apocalypse, Camille, from Castellaneta, Italy, are often considered the great lovers in Western society, and among psychobablists, it is thought that they were trying to compensate for being unloved and uncared for by their mothers as children. Because they realized their good looks, charms and sexuality could get them what they wanted and give them the attention they craved, this was the path their lives took. Rudolph Valentino, née Rudolfo Guglielmi, was an Italian guy who got a few bit parts in movies. Then a movie producer noticed that when he was on screen, the women in the audience perked up and swooned, so he hired him for a movie. Then United Artists gave him a contract, followed by Paramount after UA dropped him because they wanted to fire his wife but not him, so he did the noble thing and quit. Some people say he was gay, but he had several wives and girlfriends in his short life, so he was probably a bisexual. He made a flurry of silent films from 1920 to 1925, after which he had an ulcer that killed him at 31 years old. He was the first real movie star ever, but what it was all about was hype, the same as our so-called movie stars these days. They hyped him up to be larger than life. After his death in New York, Paramount Studios used his body for a funeral in New York, then had it shipped to California. Some say the corpse used at the funeral there was a wax dummy. Anyway, they wanted to plug his death for all the publicity they could get, and they did. He was the male sex symbol of the Roaring Twenties, a swarthy, normal-sized man. He didn't look impressive, but I guess they liked his effeminate, gentle manner. They say Casanova was trying to find love in all women because his mother did not love him. He had a fixation with older women and was helpless in the face of teases who wouldn't commit to him, which left him uncertain about their love of him, which brought him back to the uncertainty of his mother's love during youth, which made him go crazy. Benjamin Franklin has been immortalized in American history as a sensible, practical old man, but in his day, he was quite the romantic, a discreet ladies' man and a gallant gentleman who was flirty and seductive well on into his old age, particularly with the ladies in France, so the romantic spirit was alive and well in the Western world in the 17th century. There are some of Benjamin Franklin's love letters floating around in various books. For women, the late 17th century was the first time they had some semblance of a say in who they wanted to be with. Beneath the surface exteriors, people were as lusty as they always were, even when the repressive Victorian era hit in the 18th century. So all in all, people are what they are, primal sexual beings, but by keeping women cooped up in repressive roles for much of history, man has denied himself the greatest pleasure of all, that of a woman loving him freely of her own will, which is the best kind of love if you can get it, because even in these supposedly liberated times, very few people get the true, free, pure, great, equal love they really want. There is a biography out there called Casanova by Derek Parker. Mythology of love. It was once considered a favor of the gods, a divine gift that could lift mortals out of ordinary reality into a higher world. The transformative fire of ecstasy would burn away the barriers between ourselves and our souls. Robert Johnson, in the book Ecstasy. In ancient cultures that had mythologies, the concepts of gods and spirits were bandied about freely, thought to exist in everything as the essence of whatever they occupied. When a man fell in love with a woman and vice versa, it was thought that he wasn't in love with her per se but the part of her that came from the gods, that was divine. People who were perceived to be beautiful, sexy, loving, and lusty were thought to have a spirit or god in them of love and / or passion, some divine entity beyond themselves which entered into them and defined / possessed their souls. It was the same way with gays. They were thought to possess the spirits of both genders, two spirits, which is why they were often the wise men or shamans of their tribes, because they were thought to have the wisdom of being able to see the world from the point of view of both sexes, since a male and female spirit both lived inside of them at the same time. Mythologies were the fantastic stories people wove around these beliefs of spirits and gods with certain distinctive personality traits that entered into certain people and made them dominant in those traits. Lingopasana Rahasya, a Hindu devotee, believed that all joy, all pleasure is an experience of the divine. But perfect love is that love whose object is not limited. It is that love which is pure, the love of love itself, the love of the transcendent being of pleasure, the god of erotic pleasure manifested into a human individual. The mythologies of old were full of the sensual nature of man, but Christianity came along and condemned it in the name of the Holy Spirit, which was the end of viewing ourselves in terms of sensual, passionate, and loving spirits living inside of us. There are some people around who think this was the death knell of us in the West, viewing ourselves as passionate sexual beings, except for a few individuals since Christ's time like Ovid, Casanova, Havelock Ellis, etc. There are arguments around stating that most modern Western literature regarding love are tragedies, all the way from Romeo and Juliet to the sad tragedy of Boris Pasternak's Dr. Zhivago, where Zhivago and Lara, even though they declare their love for each other, suffer hardship after hardship until it ends in another romantic tragedy. A recent one I saw was the movie Message in a Bottle from 1999, based on the novel by Nicholas Sparks. It seems as though if you take love too seriously, it will end in a tragedy one way or another for you, because you're just too serious and soppy about it, tying up your entire sense of happiness from a relationship. What a tragedy! Do people really live like this, or is it just an idealistic illusion left over from a handful of classic love tales in the past carried on into modern-day love movies? Nobody I know seems this intense, profound, and lovelorn. From my experience, the real world is more superficial and pragmatic. Love rarely conquers all. It's almost as though this literature is forming our attitudes about love, that it is a transcendent ideal not possible in real life because of the general hardships and ugliness of the world in general, as with Zhivago's speech to Lara in their forest retreat, where he's hiding out while she has a powerful politician lover who she doesn't love, who thinks he owns her. Let us say farewell to our hopes, let us say farewell to each other. Let us tell each other once again our secret words of the night, which is great and pacific, like the name of the Asian Ocean. It is not an accident you are here, my secret angel, my forbidden angel, under a sky of wars and insurrections. Long ago, at the beginning of my life, under the calm sky of my childhood, you appeared in the same way. Often, later in the course of my life, I have tried to define, to give a name to the luminous spell you had cast over my soul, to that ray of light which gradually darkened, to that music which faded, which has dissolved with my very existence, which has become the key to all the doors of the world, thanks to you. She leaves with the big shot. Zhivago goes back to Moscow where his health is shot. He never sees his wife again, thinks he sees Lara one day but dies before he gets to her. She goes to his funeral, gets a packet of the love poems Zhivago wrote to her from his best friend, is then arrested as their young son escapes with the poems, the world's greatest love story and love tragedy all in one. Tragedy seems to be the lesson of passionate Western love stories after Christ versus the more freewheeling concept of love as a spiritual entity that lives inside certain individuals and is a great source of joy in the mythologies before Christ. Passion was considered a high, worthy ideal before Christianity, a bad, corrupt thing that led to self-destruction afterwards. In the 12th century story of Tristan and Isolde, he, the gallant noble knight, violates his feudal oath and becomes a traitor not for a great political cause but for a much simpler predator, the state of passionate love. People who love life and love are doomed to tragedy, it seems, like Hamlet in love with Ophelia doomed to death because of his confusion between the forces of love that lived inside of him versus the forces of society which wanted him to be another way, less emotional, more conformist, more duty-bound. Søren Kierkegaard, in writing about how Christianity destroyed the loving passion in society en masse, was so ostracized by his society that he collapsed in the street and died in 1854 at the age of 42. In the end, the colorful early mythologies of the Greeks, the Hindus, the Romans, the native Indians, etc., may be the most purest, truest discourses we have about the nature of love and sex before the civilized world was bamboozled by all these so-called great ideas out there that came onto the scene like psychology, religion, philosophy, self-help, capitalism, communism, etc. All these ideologies seem to have taken a piece out of our sensual souls and replaced it with a somber, serious political religious psychosocial agenda about how life on earth should be lived. Thankfully, if you have the time, the mythologies of old are an excellent way to help reconnect with your true sensual nature by virtue of being human away from all the current convoluted psychobabble ideologies of the world. The Tesla Love Story. The following two short articles come from a biography I was reading about Nikola Tesla, Prodigal Genius, The Life of Nikola Tesla, by John J. O'Neill, July 1944. When a newspaper reporter once asked Tesla why he had not married, his reply, as contained in the published interview was, "I have planned to devote my whole life to my work and for that reason I am denied the love and companionship of a good woman, and more, too. I believe that a writer or a musician should marry. They gain inspiration that leads to finer achievement. But an inventor has so intense a nature, with so much in it of wild, passionate quality that, in giving himself to a woman, he would give up everything and so take everything from his chosen field. It is a pity, too, sometimes we feel so lonely." The last story in the book is, "I have been feeding pigeons, thousands of them, for years, thousands of them, for who can tell? But there was one pigeon, a beautiful bird, pure white with light gray tips on its wings, that one was different. It was a female. I would know that pigeon anywhere. No matter where I was, that pigeon would find me. When I wanted her I had only to wish and call her and she would come flying to me. She understood me and I understood her. I loved that pigeon." "Yes," he replied to an unasked question. "Yes, I loved that pigeon. I loved her as a man loves a woman and she loved me. When she was ill I knew and understood. She came to my room and I stayed beside her for days. I nursed her back to health. That pigeon was the joy of my life. If she needed me, nothing else mattered. As long as I had her, there was a purpose in my life. Then one night as I was lying in my bed in the dark, solving problems, as usual, she flew in through the open window and stood on my desk. I knew she wanted me, she wanted to tell me something important, so I got up and went to her. As I looked at her I knew she wanted to tell me she was dying. And then, as I got her message, there came a light from her eyes, powerful beams of light." "Yes," he continued, again answering an unasked question, "it was a real light, a powerful, dazzling, blinding light, a light more intense than I had ever produced by the most powerful lamps in my laboratory. When that pigeon died, something went out of my life. Up to that time I knew with a certainty that I would complete my work, no matter how ambitious my program, but when that something went out of my life I knew my life's work was finished. Yes, I have fed pigeons for years, I continue to feed them, thousands of them, For after all, who can tell? There was nothing more to say. We parted in silence. The talk took place in a corner of the mezzanine in the Hotel New Yorker. I was accompanied by William L. Lawrence, science writer of the New York Times. We walked several blocks on 7th Avenue before we spoke. No longer was there any mystery to the midnight pilgrimages when he called the pigeons from their niches in the Gothic tracery of the cathedral, or from under the eaves of the Greek temple that houses the library, pursuing, among the thousands of them. For after all, who can tell? It is out of phenomena such as Tesla experienced when the dove flew out of the midnight darkness and into the blackness of his room and flooded it with blinding light, and the revelation that came to him out of the dazzling sun in the park at Budapest, that the mysteries of religion are built. But he comprehended them not, for, if he had not suppressed the rich mystical inheritance of his ancestors that would have brought enlightenment, he would have understood the symbolism of the dove. Love mythology websites. Books about myths are at hashtag 291.13, hashtag 398.2 or BL 311 at the library. ASK.com, type in love and mythology. CelticGrounds.com/chapters/mythol section/c-romance.htm. FictionPress.com/fiction/mythology. Goddess.astrology.com/venus/romance.html. Greenleft.org.au, The Mythology of Romance. ParanormalRomance.org. SagaJournal.com/archives.html. Theoi.com/nymphy/nymphophone.html. TheRomanceReader.com/fields-love.html. Warad.com/tag/folklore+& mythology.